So that we're talking about allegiance to the majesty is what does it mean that when we're allegiant to the majesty, everybody thinks that we're allegiant to the Queen, but you're not. It actually says in there that it pleases Almighty God to make the majesty the instrument to protect our rights. So it doesn't say that she has any power over us whatsoever. It says that when I went to research the word instrument, it means that the body or the entity that has the power to enforce this law. That's what an instrument is. And so the United Nations is an instrument, but they have a power to enforce laws. And Her Majesty is the instrument of God to enforce our rights. And so that's why the majesty is important. When you say that you're allegiant, because the majesty is us. The Queen is the Queen. When it says, when it says, His Majesty, the Queen, or Her Majesty, His Majesty, the King, or Her Majesty, the Queen, her or his can be likened to be similar to Almighty God, because in the spirit. And then the word majesty, when I researched that, equates to the sovereign, which is us. Everybody gets one sovereign upon our birthright. We are given a sovereign. And so when it says Her Majesty, that is the collective basket of our sovereigns, which are placed with the Queen as the instrument to enforce our sovereign rights from God. So when we say, are you allegiant to the Queen? What you're saying is, are you allegiant to your sovereign rights, which are set out in this document? So you're not, the Queen is, I wouldn't call her a figurehead because she's much higher than that. But
she's the crown.
And
the crown represents the highest.
The highest. But even she's under God, right? And then she's actually placed under us, because majesty means the sovereigns, which is us. We're the sovereigns. And so it's just almost like when we think about God, we don't need a picture of God. We don't even need a picture of Jesus. But we have that because our people's mind, our earthly minds, can't really comprehend it. So we choose to have a picture of some kind, and just like we also choose to have a queen of some kind, but in fact our rights are given by our birthright. So we don't actually need that, but because a lot of people, because there are different types of rights, is needed to be put into the commonest court of law. And so that's why it was written, because pre-1688, before they wrote the Magna Carta, people they had their ancient rights, but the immoral sovereigns were overpowering them and destroying them. And so originally they put everybody into religions that were overpowered by the Magna Carta, and then those religions became corrupted themselves. And so then they came up with the concept, I suppose, of that the sovereign actually belongs to us from our birth, from God's creation. And so they made a set of rights where they still had the ecclesiastical leaders, they still had Lord's temporal, Lord's spiritual, and they still had all of those. but that they were placed in chains by the sovereign will, which is us. Yes, is that right? In my concept, in my thinking. So now I just said to you that when I say to you, are you allegiant to the Queen? Yeah, I'll get back to that. I'm not really saying, are you allegiant to this person, which is the Queen? I'm saying, are you allegiant to Almighty God and His Majesty, which is us, and our rights that we are given through our birth? Is that right?
Yeah, that's why I said God, because when I died when I died when I was 24, because of certain things, and left my body, crossed over, experienced the other side. Cut a real long story short, had the hand of God put me back in my body. So how I view myself today is literally a genuine son of God, primarily because of the fact that I was actually, even though my parents gave me my physical body, the actual entity, the being, the life force that gave me life again was God. So that's why ever since that particular point in time, that's why I've just had this knowledge, and it's intrinsic. It's not like I know a lot of stuff. When I'm in the right place, in the right mind, like you just asking me a question just then, just answering God. Like I didn't know what being allegiant to the Majesty meant. I just intrinsically knew God, because
you were saying before about the portal, that you believe that you're a portal of.
I know I am.
Eh?
I know I am.
Yeah, can you tell me about that? Because I believe you are too. I do believe you.
What happens is in the spiritual realm, there's a thing called an open center, and it means that you have an open portal that runs right through from your top chakra all the way through to your bottom chakras, and you can tap into it. You can actually, like I can go into a state of deep transcendental meditation and just have this energy flow from literally from creation, God, whatever you.
So I think everybody has this, but some people are more open to it than others. Do you think?
What happens with me is it's about getting the truth. It's about getting the truth in and then putting it out into the world. And it's like souls, spirits, people know who these individuals are, and they gravitate towards them. And I've had some absolutely incredible experiences over my lifetime in regards to just people sharing information and knowledge with me that they just shouldn't be sharing with me. And it's like they're wanting this information, because once it enters me, it goes out into the combined consciousness of humanity. And the thing that I've found incredible, I'll give you a perfect example, okay? In 2009, late 2009, I met a lady from the Ukraine in Santa Barbara, California. And after after a while of dating her and what have you, she started to really open up about who she was. She was actually a doctor and scientist who used to work at chemical warfare laboratories in Kharkiv in the Ukraine. And what happened was she informed me on a lot of the virus and.
I don't want to talk. I really don't want to go into anything to do with that, because our videos get taken down. We really can't talk about it.
Yeah, I know.
Sorry.
What I was going to say is I'll stop it there.
Yeah.
But the information that she gave me is now coming out, and that was 11 years ago.
Right.
So it's very, very, very interesting. From people that have had, I've had friends that work for some of the biggest agencies in the United States. There's no way they should have been sharing information with me that they were sharing with me. Just it's stunning. Like the truth about what was actually happening with Osama bin Laden.
Oh, you don't want to go there either. No, don't want to go there.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, the information that I've been given over the years is just absolutely incredible. Absolutely incredible. And it's just amazing.
So we're talking about these portals. That what I'm thinking is that I'm feeling now, presently, that there are a lot of portals coming together. And I've been looking lately on the YouTube, like I'm just kind of a nobody that's popped up from nowhere about 6 months ago. And some of the people that have joined to my YouTube have been really studying the ancient laws, and they all and we all do seem to be a people that seem to be, like you said, gravitating together, that all have some knowledge in ancient law and ancient practices, shall we say, ancient practices, and we all are people that seem to have been looking back through history, and we have. So I feel that we portals are currently moving between worlds to help the people that are in this world, because I'm feeling that a lot of people that are struggling now in this time, it's because they don't understand where their ancient time has come from, where they've all come from. And I'm feeling that there are just many portals at the moment being used to bring this information forward for everybody to get an understanding, because when I'm explaining to people about what happened in their past, like New Zealand Maori and Australian Aboriginals, the Canadian First Nation peoples, the American Indians, when I'm explaining to them what happened, because do you know that in the 1600s and the 1700s, they wrote letters to us. And if you can find those letters, they explain everything of why they did what they did at that time. And they even put in there that this is for the future generations, because we know you're going to be asking. It's what we need. And so we are all trying to piece this together in a huge jigsaw. And I do feel that currently I've just received so much knowledge just in the last 6 months, and I feel like now the portals are slowly being brought together. Okay. And I just wanted to touch on this word that I did
talk. Believe it or not, here's something you'll find interesting. Those portals, those people, they're the Israelites.
Yeah. Well, who is the Israelites?
The people that have been chosen to be the portals of the Israelites. That's information.
Well, I don't believe that, so I really don't. I believe that that they are, they believe that, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't really want to go there because I'm really on a different path to that. And I've been fighting that path for quite some time, because I believe that I actually believe that the New Zealand Maori are the gatekeepers. And I believe that they are the first people that were made extinct. And I believe that that when the religions...
New Zealand was pretty much near wiped off the face of the earth quite a while ago. There was a huge cataclysm.
I believe that there's a reason why certain Israelites and certain people wanted them wiped off the face of the earth. And I actually believe that it's kind of a little bit strange, but just going through the history, when I looked at what had happened with the Zionist religions and the Catholic religions that wiped out the Germanic tribes and wiped out the Anglo-Saxon tribes and wiped out the Scottish tribes and the Irish tribes, and then those people rose up. They were all put into slavery, so white people were the first slaves, not black people. Our ancestors were the first slaves, and that I do believe that and God in His will looked down, and the religions had written the Magna Carta and put all of the peon slaves into slavery, put us all into slavery, and I believe that I believe that God loves all His children. And
yes, 100%.
I don't believe that the Israelites are the chosen people. I believe that we are all chosen people of God, and we are all open to these portals. And I don't think that all man did not emanate from the Israelites. This is what they believe, but I don't want to get into too much because I'm not religious. But what I do know is that the originally how they created society was through religions, because they started the Zionist religions, and they started the Islamic religions, they started the Catholic religions, and then those people, their leaders, managed the masses. That's what they did. They decided everything for us. And so, and then when they wrote the Magna Carta for themselves, and they gave themselves all power over the peon slaves, well, they basically said that if you weren't in one of the religions, then you were a non-existent, you were a heathen. And so the heathens rose up, and they said, well, we're going to start our own group that's outside of your groups. And this was this battle that went on.
Kind of the same stuff that's going on today.
Well, this battle, I'm going to show to you that it has never ended. And
I believe it.
And then so when the Magna Carta put us all in slavery under the barons, it went in that hierarchy. It went the papal and Zionist leaders who appointed the kings. The kings appointed the knights and barons, and the knights and barons ruled over us. And so, and then we were not God's beings, because many of them didn't believe in God or in the religions. They just believed in the natural law. So the religion said, well, therefore you are not, you're not there, you're not something, you're nothing. And so therefore you could not own land, and you couldn't vote, and you couldn't be on legal councils, because you were of a nothing status. The useful idiots, they called us, didn't they?
Yeah.
And then so then the Lollards all joined together through Simon Fish, and the Lollards joined together, which were of no religion. And that was the Protestants, wasn't it? That became the Protestants, I suppose. And then they rose up, and by this time, I suppose the king was sick of the Pope, wasn't he? And so he wanted out of that, something like that. And so they wrote this 1688 Bill of Rights. But when they wrote that, it didn't delete the rights of the Israelites or the Zionists or the Catholics. They still all kept theirs. And then we had another one that was brought into the play. So this is what's going on today, that in New Zealand, what they've got is they've got these called Who-Man's rights, which belong to that belongs to the Zionists, the Catholics, and the Islamists, and all of those. And then they've also got our 1688 Bill of Rights. And then they created this 1990 New Zealand Bill of Rights that has got restrictions. in section 3, 4, and 5. So what I'm seeing that they've done is the section 19 is the human's rights, and they've taken this human's rights, which are all the Magna Carta crowd, and they've inserted it into one section of the 1990 New Zealand Bill of Rights, which has restrictions on section 3, 4, and 5. And then on the other side, they've got our 1688 Bill of Rights. And so this 1990 sits in the middle and adjudicates between the two of them. That's what they're doing. And this is what they're doing in all our countries. They're trying to, because as we are God's beings, then we all, as we are of God's creation, we all have the right to choose where we want to stand. So if you want to stand under the Pope, well, the Pope's got all his own laws, hasn't he? If you want to stand under the rabbis of the Jewish, well, they've got all their own laws, haven't they? And then if you want to stand under the Majesty, well, but the Majesty's is the highest, because hers is the only one that comes directly from Almighty God that rises above all of them. So
what do you think's going on right now in New Zealand? Because you said the New Zealand Bill of Rights kind of waves between these right now.
Yeah, no, this is happening in Australia, America, not America, because they've done a sneaky thing in America. I'll tell you what they've done. So in my conspiracy theory, so just so everyone knows, this is Kate Floss's conspiracy theory. Because in Canada, right, this is what they've done. Well, getting back to our New Zealand Maori of now in the pre-16s, the man called Hugo Grotius. If you want to look up Hugo Grotius, and he wrote the Magna Carta was called the Law of the Land, and then to combat that, he wrote the Law of the Sea, and the Law of the Sea removed us from them, from their power. Because you could not delete their law that they had made, because it was a forever document. So what they did was extricated us out and lifted us up, put them in chains because they couldn't delete them, and then put God above the whole lot of us. That's what they did in my conspiracy theory.
Actually, that makes perfect sense, because that's what the pyramid on the back of the US dollar bill represents, where you've got a broken pyramid. You've got a pyramid with a flat top, and then it's like we've been separated from God through these man-made laws. That's what it represents. I knew that we're being separated from God. I thought it was maybe through the monetary material system, but you've just put it together.
It's all in the spiritual. It's all in the spiritual.
Yeah, it's all in the spiritual.
Yeah, and we've got to get back to don't worry about the money or the land.
Yeah, it's all in the spiritual.
It's all in the
agree,
spiritual.
100%.
We've got to get back in the spiritual. Well, when they created that, if you go and look at the 1688 Bill of Rights, there are only like about 13 rights. There aren't many.
Yeah.
And they all come from the natural law. And they say that all people, it doesn't use the word in there, humans. And that I just told you, but I'll just tell for the audience that who man in the Jewish is the food of the Israelite people. Is that right? The food
of the Kabbalists.
Yeah, so it's their food, and then and it also means I must look this up because I'm always forgetting, but it means that they have the absolute right of entry into your country. And that's why it's called the Human's Rights, because they have infused it into our country where it wasn't before. It only went into our country in 1990 1993, after they had removed all of our constitutions and removed the Queen.
Mm-hmm.
So when they removed that, then they have replaced it with the humans, which belongs to the Jewish and under the Islamic, the human who means God that is neither male nor female in their Islamic rite.
Yeah.
So that if you can imagine, we've got these three rites going on. And then the Catholics, well, I don't quite know where they are. You've got these papal rite, then you've got your Zionist rite, and then you've got your Islamic rite, and then you've got our Protestant rite that choose not to stand under any of those. So that can be anyone.
That's why they keep on. That's why they keep on sacrificing us.
Yes, well, because the 1688 had put them all in chains.
Mm-hmm.
And they all feel that they should not be in those chains.
Well, it's like you said, in regards to the Zionists, which fall like the Masons and the Zionists, like at the upper degree, are just one and the same. And that's what I was saying. That's why they keep on sacrificing us, because we're their food. We're their cannibals.
Well, yeah, the food. Yeah, that's right. That is right.
You know, when you go through it's horrific actually when you go through the war memorials in Europe.
Yeah,
just seeing the thousands, the tens of thousands of crosses, and it's like the poor old, I shouldn't say the poor old, the ignorant Christian keeps on lining up to fight these wars over falsehoods, over misinformation on where everything stands, as far as basically where everything stands. So it's very interesting. I think it's also, just in talking about that, I find it interesting because, with New Zealand, you mentioned about earlier on.
All right. Well,
what I was going to say is, you were saying that it's God's country.
Yeah, because Hugo Grotius.
Yeah.
Hugo Grotius. There's Hugo Grotius and another man called Puffendorf, Simon Fish, all of those. They were all the ones that fought to get out of this Magna Carta. Mm-hmm. And they wrote the Bill of Rights under God, that we were all supreme sovereign beings, and we didn't have to be in this cage that they wanted us to be in, that mm-hmm. we could be free of those cages. So you could be in that place if you wanted to be, but if you didn't want to be, then you didn't have to be. And because we are all God's creatures and we are born free, we're not born into a religion. And so then, this man called Hugo Grotius, he wrote the Law of Nations and the Law of the Seas and the Law of Man, the Law of the Natural Law. There are a couple of them that wrote various books, and I believe in my heart of hearts, nobody writes like these guys did these days, and I believe that they were very highly spiritual, sent from God, because I don't know how they wrote what they wrote. If you go and read what they wrote, it is out of this world. Nobody writes like that these days. So I believe that God was on earth all during that time, and he was here with us.
There's certainly a lot more alive inside of us than what we are allowing God to be.
That's right, yeah. And so then he was born in a place called Zealand, and he wrote a lot of his writings and governed a town in a place called New. Mm-hmm. And he wrote his work directly from God, and he is the one that said that we are all sovereign beings by our birthright, and we are born free. So he wrote all of his laws from God, and he said that there are some laws that even God has no control over, that we are born with it. And one of them was speech, that he said that you could not make a law that we could not follow because of our natural urge that we could not resist. and that when you tell God's creatures not to speak about anything, they're not able to follow that law because it goes against nature. So that is why we have that law in there, that anybody can speak and you can say anything you like. If you want to swear, you want to call someone a distorted heathen, well, you can, because it's up to those people to have an armour of loving of self to not let those words get in. Isn't that right? And then, so he wrote all of this. Well, he sent, it's very strange, he sent out Tasman as the religions were going out into the world to all of the countries where all of the natives were, namely Africa, America, Canada, New Zealand, and Australia. When they were going out, and they went to India, but they got thrown out there, didn't they? But when they were going out, he also was sending his ships out to carry the natural law with him. And the New Zealand Maori were the last country, is that it says in the Bible, the first will be the last and the last will be the first.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so I'm not religious, but this is just what's been coming to me lately, and I don't know where it comes from, dear Lord. I really don't know, but that's what he just says to me. So, and then New Zealand was the last. So New Zealand, when that happened, Grotius was the one that said to the church that they don't know God, but that doesn't make them heathen. Because the church was saying, if they don't know God, therefore they are heathenists, therefore they can't own the country that they live on. And Grotius is the one that said they own that country as sovereigns by their birthright, just simply because they are born to that land, they own it.
Born to that land.
And they own it. And so they do. Yeah. I've finally come to that understanding. Well, not completely. Not completely, no.
Well, it's not. What it is when you understand how the human consciousness works and how the human consciousness.
Well, I wouldn't use human. I would use person. I wouldn't use that word human at all.
Okay.
I would use person.
People's consciousness.
Either people or person is fine.
Yeah.
In my world.
Yeah. No, I understand. No, and it's interesting because when you understand how people's consciousness works and how we create the world around us, the land that they're born on is their sovereign land.
Well, their umbilical cord is tied to it. Yeah, they can't escape.
No. I mean, it's very, very, it's very interesting. That's a very profound thing to actually think of.
So, well, then but what he did say is that the state, which is us, the state is a combination of the moral beings and the immoral beings. And that he said that what we need to have under God's law a collective of the moral beings, because the moral beings are very weak in their nature, because they're good and kind and sweet, and the immoral beings don't respect that. And the immoral beings will always overpower the moral beings if we don't collect them and give them those protections. So that is why they brought in the 1688, to collect the moral beings together to give them strength. And so he wrote all about that. And then what he said was is that these beings that are in these countries were being overtaken by immoral beings that were slaughtering them and raping them and pillaging them. And what they were doing was, through Samuel Marsden and various other Williams's families, were dividing the tribes, and they would give weapons to one tribe to slaughter the chiefs of the other tribes. And once their chief was gone, they didn't know what to do because they need a chief. They had, all tribes had a chief. Well, we all have a chief. We have our chief, can be even God. But so anyway, he said that the moral beings as a collective have a duty under God to protect other moral beings if it looks like they are being invaded by the immoral. And so this is why he said, whoever sights the land, as far as the eye can see, who will sight the land? If the land is inhabited, then they have the right to protect that country if they are asked by the sovereign beings to protect them from the immoral. And they have the right of preemption. That is right of preemption. That's what it means. But the right of preemption does not give them the right to own the land. It only gives them the right if they're invited to protect the people and the land. And the other one was by discovery. If it's uninhabited, you could get it by discovery, right? Well, when Hugo Grotius sent out Tasman to Tasmania, and they sent these ships out to all the countries, and they gave them this 1688 Bill of Rights kind of thing. They basically gave them rights which overpowered the church, which said they had no rights. And they said they do have rights. And then they all became like kind of national parks. And then, but what happened is these adventurers, they were called land jobbers and adventurers, started entering these countries, dividing the chiefs, slaughtering everyone, and buying up land. Well, they weren't allowed to buy the lands, but just taking lands. And so then it became
mercenaries.
Well, yeah, they were pirates, and so this is why the colonisation occurred. That's why it had to occur under God, because they were going to be all dead. And so anyway, what I'm saying is that, where did I get to? Is that when Tasman went to Australia and discovered parts of Australia, and then Cook, or I think it was, discovered Norfolk Island. Norfolk Island was empty, so that was claimed outright by Britain. And then because Cook sighted New Zealand and Tasman had sighted New Zealand, and it was in the same meridian, that's how the Queen got her right of preemption. But you're not allowed to you can't just go in a country and use your right of preemption. It's the right of preemption just is because all people have the right to sell their land, right, if they want to. And so the right of preemption was that the chiefs, if they wanted to sell, had to sell to the Queen of the government of the Queen, who was under God, and then she would decide if the land jobbers and venturers could buy it or not. So the chiefs were supposed to go through her, and all the British and the Catholics and everybody knew that. And what they did, Samuel Marsden, with the New Zealand Maori, is they went to the chiefs and they got them to write the Declaration of Independence. And that's called the whakaputanga. And once they got them to sign that Declaration of Independence, they basically said that the New Zealand Maori were a government. And so then it became legal to buy all the lands. And so they bought up the whole country. And the chiefs were all left landless. So they had tried to do this in Australia, but the king had stepped in and stopped them due to his right of preemption. So he had stopped that, and then they tried to do it in Canada and America. Well, they tried to do it in America as well, and then that was stopped as well. And they tried to do it in Canada, and that was stopped. But nobody was too worried about New Zealand because they just thought they were under the protection of New South Wales, and everybody just thought, well, but nobody realised that these, I don't know, what should we call them? These groups. Nobody realised that these groups would go directly to the chief and get them to declare independence and become a country when they weren't, and then buy up all their lands. So that's why the New Zealand Maori was so special. But anyway, New Zealand was named after Hugo Grotius, New Zealand.
Gotcha.
And he wrote all his laws from God. So that's why they call it God's land. So and then I'm going to explain to you why the New Zealand Maori are so important. It's a bit of a long story, but we're almost at the end. Are you feeling stressed?
No.
All right, well, we're almost at the end because we're going to get back to here now. So what had happened was the missionaries that had broken from the church, they had kind of left the church and they weren't actually missionaries. They claimed to be missionaries because they weren't allowed in New Zealand without having a missionary status, because the churches had constitutions against them buying lands. And so they were only allowed to teach the natives not to eat each other and nothing more. And yeah.
Which is a positive.
That was repugnant to God's law.
Yeah.
They were only allowed to teach them things that were repugnant to God's natural law. And part of that was not eating people. So that's what they were allowed to teach. But what had happened was a whole bunch of these missionaries, even though they pretended to be under the church, they all lost their jobs, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
They set up a government in New Zealand with unbeknownst to the British or to any of the churches. And New Zealand became a Catholic territory and a Jehovah territory, from what I know. And there was a lot of molestation and stuff going on there, a lot. And that's all in the records by those places. And they got them to sign this declaration that they were the government. Once they did that, land sales were legal because the government could sell land, right? And then they bought up the whole country and they threw all the tribes off of their lands whenever they felt like it. And so the Queen, luckily, was able to exercise her right of preemption. So they fought for 5 years to get out of this declaration. And the Queen said to the Maori, if I can come here, if you let me be the sovereign governance, I am permitted to take all those lands back, the whole freaking lot. And so they accepted her and they submitted themselves as subjects. And they are the only tribe in the world that is actually legally listed as subjects under the Majesty. None of the others.
Interesting.
Yeah, they're the only ones because they are God's people, and that is why. And so God put them, they were the first peoples to be made extinct. And so God made them into a Maori race, another race, and made them subjects. Well, if you'll notice that the United Nations have never accepted New Zealand Maori until the year 2010. Up until then, they were not recognised by the United Nations because they had subject status. And as subject status, there were certain laws that, like, for example, foreigners were not allowed to operate within their country. And so the United Nations was not able to operate within New Zealand, in my conspiracy theory. And what happened was, in 1865, the New Zealand Maori went to the courts and asserted their right as subjects because the churches had battled against, well, it goes back to the Magna Carta. There's two entities that were warring in England and Germany and all those places. That spilled out into all of our countries, and the battle continued. And so the battle continued in New Zealand, and then when the Queen came in and took her right of preemption, and she put everybody as subjects in the country, then these religious leaders of the Magna Carta went to the court and fought against that. So when they fought against it, they went to the court and registered themselves as subjects of the Majesty in 1865, and there's actually an act and it's not been repealed. However, and so this is why they called them God's people, to protect all of the natives of all of Canada, Australia, America. Well, America got taken because those two entities that were fighting, they got them out of the British Queen. And they've got another thing over there, which is, I don't know what it is. Who knows?
Yeah, I don't know. I'd have to do a lot of research to dig into that stuff here. Go to the Library of Congress or what have you and start reading.
And certain states in America are still under the Queen.
Yes.
Yeah, some of them.
There's either 4 or 5 of them.
Yeah, you've got to find them. We need you to find them.
Yeah.
Because we've got to join us all together and get ourselves back. They've separated us all. We want all the portals to come in, so we need to find them.
Yeah, because I know for a fact that Texas, for example, is literally its own country in the US that only agrees to do business with the United States of America. And I can dig into that stuff a lot more. So, because Texas... Yeah, if I was to say anything, I'd be talking out of place. I'll have to dig into that because it's really interesting. Because when you go to school in Texas, you're taught about Texas first, and then after Texas, then you get taught about the United States. So first is Texas history, and then it's U.S. history. So Texans are very genuinely a very unique group of people in this country because they all know that they are an independent country and we only agree to do business with the United States. And that's honestly why the US doesn't screw with the actual main body of the United States, doesn't screw with Texas too.
But I wonder if you can investigate if you are under the rights of the Majesty.
Yeah, no, I can look into that.
Because I think you might be.
Yeah.
And so if you are, we have certain rights from God, and that's going to help us to what's going on in the world right now. Okay?
Yeah, it'd be very interesting to... I've actually got some amazing contacts that I can contact in regards to that who will be able to tell me.
So this is what happened in this world, that if you can think back to Germany and if you can think back to England, that there were these, powers of entities that had all joined together. Each one was a power in its own right, but it was up to us, the sovereigns. We are given free will, so we can choose where we want to stand here. And so we have an overall body in the world somewhere, which in some other realm, that make sure that wherever you choose to stand, that those rights are protected. Do you understand? But what they've gone and done is brought those entities into each of our countries, and our spirit is becoming weak. Us.
Yeah.
We're becoming weak because they have overwhelmed us with thousands and thousands of laws that we don't understand.
Yes.
And it's in their Bibles, in their biblical texts that aren't even in English.
Yeah, because the reason why they overwhelm us with all this stuff is to keep us confused. And as you said, it drains us of energy when they're still, they live their lives under the laws that were written hundreds of years
For
ago.
them, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And our life
Yeah,
force is becoming weak because we are the moral people. We are the moral sovereigns
Yeah.
under
And
God.
they know what they're doing. They know
Oh,
what
they
they're
do.
doing.
Yes.
Yeah, yes, they do. Hang on 1 second.
So anyway, so my goal is, in my conspiracy theory, is to gather the sovereigns. And we need to all understand where all this started. This has gone on for hundreds of years, but our sovereign being is becoming weak. And our sovereign being is being powered because their sovereign beings are like 3 or 4 different structures, and we're only one structure. And so the New Zealand Maori, I'm going to tell you what they've done, and I'm going to reveal this, and you're really going to understand what's going on. In 1986, these entities decided that what was done in 1840 with the colonization, where all of these nations were put under the protections of their God's 1688 rights, they decided that that the Queen or God himself did not have the right to do that. That because it took away their right, the natives' rights to choose of where they were going to stand. And because they were pure and they were innocent and they didn't belong anywhere, they basically were in kind of a no man's land, like what do they call, like the law of the forest or something. So they were outside of everything. They were just like their own sovereign beings in God, just living in God. And which is in a lovely world, they should have been left like that, but obviously it's just not going to work like that. So, so anyway, in 1986, all of our constitutions were removed. Canada, South Africa, they were all removed, and I'm not sure. Something going on in America, but it's a little bit different. But the New Zealand Maori were the gatekeepers, because as long as the Treaty of Waitangi stood, that made them subjects, and as long as their court affirmation that they were subjects, as long as that stood, then that protected the 1688 Bill of Rights from God of our sovereign, us, the Majesty, the sovereigns. And so the New World Order and these other beings were not able to infiltrate. And that in turn protected the Australian Aboriginals, and that in turn protected the Canadian First Nations and all of those people. But in 1975, the Maori Queen went to visit the Pope. And when she came back, so I'm not saying anything here, but I'm just saying this is what happened in the history. She went to visit and she came back, and a man called Manuka Hanari, who was a director of the Catholic Church, he rewrote the original Declaration of Independence, and he removed we were subjects in there. We were mentioned as subjects, and he removed that. He removed our subject status. And then him, together with another man called Hugh Kafaru, they took the treaty that also had subject status, and they removed that, and they rewrote it. And they instituted both of those into a place called the Waitangi Tribunal. And this battle that went on with the Magna Carta and the peon slaves in England, this battle began again in New Zealand in 1975. and they battled it out. And unfortunately, our New Zealand Maori didn't understand what it meant to be subjects. And so they renounced their subject status, and they became a people of, like a lost people. They didn't have any rights, even though they have their rights innately from God. They didn't have it in on paper kind of thing. You don't need to have it on paper, but we have it on paper to combat the immoral person. So as soon as a people like that lose their subject status and they don't have any kind of rights, even though they have them, the powers that be have to put them into one of the other categories. You have to kind of go somewhere, or else you're wandering around in a no man's land where you get raped and pillaged and beaten and killed. So so they got put into the United Nations Human's Rights with Refugees. That's where they got put. And then through that, and then since their subject status was removed, they decided to remove it from the Australian Aboriginals and the Canadian First Nations, and it was supposed to be done with the American Indians. I'll tell you about that in a minute. So all of these people that were protected under God's rights of 1688 were then placed under Human's Rights of Refugees, and they have become refugees in their own country. And they've tagged the refugees' rights, the Human's Rights that are not in our law, onto them. And America pulled a sneaky, because when the Indigenous rights of the UN came about, America was the one, in my conspiracy theory, that pushed for all of our natives to go into that. And then America pulled a Swiftie and stepped out of it, and they wrote their own Indigenous rights things only for their people in their country.
Yeah.
So what they've done with our Australian, New Zealand, and Canadian is tagged on 370 million refugees to them.
Wow.
And can I just keep going?
Yeah.
I just want to kind of finish this. I'm almost finished and it'll be an hour. Well, this Human's Rights, because I'm only up this far now, so I've been on this journey. This is where I am now. And I just went to research these Human's Rights. So I was thinking, how come we've got two bills of rights? We've got a 1990 Bill of Rights and we've got our 1688 Bill of Rights. And then I see we've got these Human's Rights. And I just today went to look at the Human's Rights, and I realised that because they come from the United Nations, they are not in legislation. They are not binding. And what they've done is they slipped the New Zealand Maori into there, and the Australian Aboriginals into there, and the Canadian First Nations. They slipped them into there. I don't know what they've done with the American Indians, but they've slipped them into there. And then in this 1990 Bill of Rights, they had Section 19, which they tagged that onto there. And the 1990 Bill of Rights is in Parliament under legislative, judicial and executive, which is the order from God of the 1688 Bill of Rights of our right to have a Parliament. And so they slipped Human's Rights into 19, but they put a clause in there of Section 3, 4 and 5 that the executive of Parliament could block any of those rights that were repugnant to ours. So if you were to look at, it's not that I'm calling anybody out, I'm only just going to use this as one example because it's one of the heinous ones, but that I understand in my limited understanding under the, can I say Jewish law or Zionist law without being offensive to all your people, that under their law, their sons are to be circumcised, and then the rabbi will suck the baby's penis for the blood. They'll suck the baby's penis and to get the blood right. And then we've heard that the babies are getting herpes from the rabbis that have got herpes, and they are suffering from brain damage and hemorrhages. We see that is a law that is repugnant to our 1688 God-given laws under cruel and unusual punishment. So that the executive in Section 3 can block them having that law in our country. And so they have a law, the Islamists and the Zionists, they have the law that if we speak against their religion, that we should be decapitated. Well, that is repugnant. So this is why, so this 1990 is like a buffer.
Mm-hmm.
But what they've done with all our Indigenous people in our countries is put them in the wrong side. They've put them over there in the refugee side, because in order for that refugee law to come into our countries, which it was blocked from for hundreds of years, was blocked for 200 years, they had to attach them onto our Indigenous people. And then since our Indigenous people come under refugees and the land innately belongs to them through their umbilical cord to the land since before the white man came, then they kind of almost trump, because they have the higher power, right? Because it's their land. They're the sovereign holders. Because in the Treaty of Waitangi it says, to the chiefs who are the sole sovereigns thereof, meaning that this is theirs. She said, I'm going to govern, but this is your land. She said that. And so these human rights have been glued on to our Indigenous, and then they've gone through the 1990 as the blocker to stop anything that's repugnant to our 1688. And then what they've done is they've gone all across the country, and they've been, for the last 30 years, they have been getting, including us, because we have free will, to file cases, thousands and thousands of cases through our courts using the human's rights through the buffer.
Yeah.
And so we are essentially killing ourselves. And so we've got to get out of that, all of us in our countries. We've got to bring all our sovereigns back together through all the portals. And that's why I know now why I'm here to meet you. It's because we've got you over there, and we need you to go and find all the countries that are still under this 1688, and we're all going to join ourselves together. We're going to invite all the portals to come in that want to stand under these God's rights.
The combined people's consciousness needs to come back together. That's all there is to it. I mean, seriously, that's it in a nutshell. And that's what this period of time is about also. It's about an awakening to that knowledge. The truth is coming out, you know. So for that truth to be able to, for us to be able to regain our sovereignty, we have to become aware and awake to how these other individuals have actually been controlling us and actually manipulating us. And, well, not so much. Well, I was controllable and manipulable up till, mostly about 10, 15 years ago. And then it was, you guys aren't going to get me on this stuff anymore. That's all there is to it. I have a high disdain for today's laws and authorities. Like with what's been going on in the last 18 months, from the moment that stuff started, I knew it was off. There was no way you're going to stop me from being able to do what I needed to do. That's all.
But we still don't want to go back to. You don't want to go back to common law, like pre 1688.
Yeah.
Because what the 1688 says that we must have our common courts, but pre 1688 you're under the ecclesial courts.
Gotcha.
You're going to be under a court because
there needs to be some balance, some sort of something there. People need that. Well,
as God says, because God says, our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And in heaven we have the King of Kings.
Yeah.
And on earth we have a king or a queen. It can be Pope, but under the only one that says under Almighty God that He did not make them the king or queen over us. He made them the instrument to enforce our will of our natural law.
Yeah.
So
there's definitely, without a doubt, it blows me away how much debauchery, just how far off track everything's gotten. And like you said, it's primarily because they've just, and this came across my path a number of years ago because they've done it in the US Congress. It was like the US Congress was never meant to have congressmen in there full time being paid a salary. It was meant to be a part-time job where you didn't get paid. You only showed up to pass the odd law here and the odd law there, and then you go back to your regular job. Because that's literally what you're talking about was how the US Congress was formed. And the interesting thing is that these guys came up with the idea that, hey, if we're always having to make up all these different laws and we're going to be here all this time, then we need to get paid. So they started manipulating the playing field to their own advantage. And that's where this repugnant stuff, a lot of it's where a lot of it's come from, in all sincerity.
Well, the problem is that why can they do that? Because we're not claiming. We haven't been claiming. People are running around in protests in droves, going from here to there, waving their arms, but we are given courts and we have our 1688 Bill of Rights under God and we're not claiming them. And
it's very interesting because I was talking to some friends in New Zealand and it was, a friend's wife and a bunch of her friends all lost their jobs because they weren't going to take a certain medication. And I said to him, like, why don't you just get together and you've got enough people there. You've got hundreds, if not thousands, just as far as nurses are concerned, throughout the entire country. Why don't you take the entire government to court over what you've done? He told me that they've tried. There's been a number of lawsuits where they've tried to actually get their rights back in some way, shape, or form, and they've all been thrown out.
I will tell you why. I know why. Because they have been using the 1990 Bill of Rights, which is the buffer between the human's rights and the 1688. The 1990 Bill of Rights has an overriding clause because it has to block the human's rights of the repugnant laws from those religions.
Gotcha.
But the 1688 Bill of Rights is from Almighty God, and it can't be overridden. It has an obstant clause. The last
Gotcha.
clause of it is an obstant clause, and it says that no laws can ever be written that are contrary to the laws that are in here now.
And New Zealand as a country accepted those laws originally.
Well, ours is special because our New Zealand Maori are the only ones that signed themselves actually in a court of law to be subjects of the Queen. Now, you, me, all Americans, doesn't matter what they tell you about that Declaration of Independence, when we were born in England or Scotland or when we were born and when we travelled on the ships, those rights went with us because the 1688 Bill of Rights says it's a forever document under God and it's for all our descendants forever. We carry it with us through our birthright. We're born with it. We're born, but there's only like 13 rights. There aren't many. One of them is the right to carry a weapon. That's in nature, that you can carry a weapon because all creatures of God have a right to defend themselves and they all have something to defend. A crab has got pincers and snakes got poison.
It's interesting that you mention that too, because you like in the US Constitution, you've got these, I think it's 12 or 14 amendments or rights or what have you. And in the 33-degree Masons Bible, you'll see those rights also. And that's what puzzles me about what's happened with like the Masons, because in reading their Bible, there's a lot of there's some really good stuff in there. I mean, I don't see anything sinister or anything in any way, shape, or
form. It isn't. No, what you've got to understand, the way to understand it is that to realise that there are several groups of rights.
Yeah.
Because we're all God's children. It's nobody to say that my rights are more important than the Jewish rights, or the Jewish rights are more important than but it's up to the powers that be, what are they called, the world developers, that they are the buffer between each to make sure that nobody goes over into the others you understand what I mean? So we have no power over theirs and they have no power over ours. But we, as our free will, have the right to choose where we want to stand. Yeah. But they have tricked us into standing under their humans' rights, and they've got our people filing. They're sneaky. They've got our people filing thousands of their rights through our courts. When we should be claiming our 1688 rights under God. We should be claiming those. So why are they losing? Because the 1990 buffer has got a blocker to the humans' rights. So whenever you use humans' rights, they're just going to block it, block. But if you bring in these God's rights, they can't block God. Can't block God. You just can't. Yeah, and so, but you have to read it very carefully to understand how you can use it. Like someone said, well, I lost my job because of that thing that you're talking about. And then I said, you can use your 1688 Bill of Rights because that comes under cruel and unusual punishment because they've forced you to lose your means of getting money to get food and getting money to buy shelter, right? Gosh, that noise is loud. What's that noise?
It's not on my side.
It's like a boom, ba boom, ba boom, boom, ba boom, ba boom.
Yeah, I hear it.
Can you hear it?
Yeah.
Is it the drums?
It's coming over the phone.
Are they trying to block us? They're trying to...
Yeah, that's trippy.
Oh, that's creepy. How creepy is that? Well, anyway, So she talked to the police, and the police said, well, they have the right to sack you because if you're not able to get into their job to do your job, then obviously they can't pay you for not doing your job. And I said to her, well, that comes under forfeiture of particular person, where they are blocking you from going along your way to do your jobs to get your food. So they're actually in violation in the forfeiture of person. So you've got to know how to use that, God's rights. If you know how to use them, you are forced to be reckoned with. And as all sovereigns standing together, they can't beat us. It's the highest law. It can't be overruled by the United Nations, any court in the entire world. It can't be overruled because it's in all the Bibles. It comes from all the Bibles. Even the Islamic Bible comes from the Islamic Bible. All these laws that they have, like sucking on the penis and decapitating people, well, that's not from God. So
God, no.
They wrote all that themselves.
Just so you know, that practice finally made the headlines because it was still being practiced in New York up until just a few years ago. Holy shit, did stuff come unhinged when people found that people were livid. I was just like, try telling you.
They also have a law that if they have intercourse with a child before they're 3 years old, then it will not affect them for their marriage purposes when they get older. So basically, they kind of believe before 3 years old, you're not really a person, I suppose. And so that's why, everybody's using the wrong rights, Lawrence. And that's why it's a bit noisy, but that's why I wanted to get this out to you.
Well, I appreciate it because I tell you what, I will definitely be digging into that stuff. I like, especially that 1688 Bill of Rights. That stuff's really very, very interesting. Very, very.
We need to lift the majesty up, which is us.
Mm-hmm.
We're the majesty.
So let me just ask you, what do you think has actually happened to our queen, to our monarchy?
Listen to me, she's going to pass. And if we don't get this fixed before she passes, we're in deep shit.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. And I genuinely, because I was like, well, one, who's going to take over the throne? And, Charles is useless, so I figured it'll most probably be William. And then I was like, well, Harry's being used, right? Harry's the youngest, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, Harry is just a mess right now. He's being used like nothing else on earth.
Well, that's all part of their Kabbalism, isn't it? Bringing down the Commonwealth. They're bringing down the royal family. But let me just tell you something. This is what a lot of people don't understand about this. It doesn't matter who is in there. It just only needs a shelf. It needs a shelf to sit on. Because it's from God and it can't be taken from you. But God has given us the shelf to sit it on, which makes it easier for our minds to comprehend. We don't actually need this shelf, but the immoral people will destroy us if we don't have it. So it is regardless of who is there, whether it's Prince Charles and it even tells you in there, if you haven't got Prince Charles, you go to the Princess of Orange. There's a princess in Orange. And so it tells you, it says that the successors will take it, and Charles is the successor, whether you like him or not. And in the event that there are no successors, then you have to go back to Orange and get the Princess and Princess of Orange and bring them over from Denmark. That's what it tells you to do. And if they are not there, you need to choose someone high up. These royal families are not just sat there for nothing, They actually have a very important purpose, but we've lost our understanding of what it is.
Yeah, and And in all honesty, it's the Zionists that have been doing a huge amount of the undermining. Huge amount of the undermining. It's like they're so envious and so jealous of what we have that they want to be able to have that. They want to be able. They're the ones that are taking control of the artificial intelligence. They're the ones that are bringing all the artificial intelligence into Israel, all the networks and all the security systems and all the, the US has signed off so much of its military security to the Zionists.
Well, they changed the Declaration of Independence of America in around 2014, and they put in a Zionist birthday. They called it Education Day, but it was actually a Jewish religious holiday. And they inserted that into the Declaration of Independence, which basically put America under Noahide law, or the evil spirits are not going to let us talk anymore. They're not.
The who spirits?
Yes, the who man.
The evil spirits?
Yeah, the who man are here. It's only when I speak.
They don't mess with me. They've tried to mess with me a number of occasions. The serious, trying to take my body over, and it's not worked out well for them. Not at all. They can screw with me, but I've had some very, very interesting experiences when it comes to that sort of stuff.
But we know what we have to do now, don't we, Lawrence?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I'm definitely going to be digging into that 1688.
So we want all the sovereigns to come together, all the portals to come together.
Yeah.
And we're going to, there's many portals, and I'm working with some in New Zealand now. I'm telling you something, those New Zealand Maori are crucial. We've all got to surround them and protect them. They're God's people, I'm telling you.
Yeah.
They are, I've got a job interview. They are the gatekeepers. They were the gatekeepers, and they've infiltrated the gatekeepers. And we've got to shut the gate.
I'll have a talk to a buddy of mine, because he's full grown. He's probably the most Maori of Maoris that I came across when I was down there in New Zealand, and he knows stuff like the Maori. Honestly, the Maoris know stuff that many of us don't know. My mother is part Maori also, just so you know, and I've got a little drop of that in me.
Well, now you know why you're a portal.
Yeah, might be because of
so
that.
That's where that's come through. Yeah, and that's why we're meeting. God is just so great I mean, that's just amazing.
No, my mother is. There's a tribe of Māori that were in the Akaroa area of Christchurch, and Akaroa was a French settlement, and pretty amazing. But we found out probably about 10 years ago that on my mother's side of the family, her father was Māori, and it explains, once we did the DNA work, it explains, my mother actually, she had a kind of a very Asian-y, European-y with dark skin look to her, kind of very islander, exotic islander look. And so even my daughter's got it. My daughter, when she got her DNA done, she's got Pacific Island blood in it.
Oh no, we don't want that. No. We have to block them out too, because they're just taken by the Americans. They're just taken over by the Mormon Church. So We just have to protect our own country at the moment. We can't have them coming in anymore.
Thank you for recognizing the power of the Mormon Church.
Well, I've done a video on that. Yeah.
Yeah, the Mormon Church out here is no joke. And very few Americans realize the power that group of people hold over this country.
They put the Book of Mormon into New Zealand Parliament and removed the Bible. Yeah, I've got pictures of it.
Oh my gosh.
And then you've got Jacinda Ardern, born
She's a bloody Mormon.
Yeah, and her father, she's leading New Zealand. Her father, Ross Ardern, is leading the Cook Islands in Tokelau.
Yeah.
And then her uncle, Ian Ardern, is ruling over in Samoa. So you've got a family of Mormons. They've taken over. Yeah, so that's another story. That's another video. Let's not go there. We're going to talk about that.
Because what a lot of people don't realize is it was the Mormon Church that gave the Italian mob money so they could build Vegas. Las Vegas, Las Vegas. That whole of debauchery in the United States, even though the Italians ran it, it was Mormon money that actually made that. And ironically enough, the group of people that now run Vegas are actually the Zionists. And that's what...
No, well, they've joined forces. Well, they're one and the same. They're not different. They're one and the same, in my opinion. Except they just have a little bit of deviation in their deviant practices. But no, they're one and the same, the 12 tribes of Israel. That's why I said, don't call me...
It's amazing, man. It really is. It's incredible. I only just started really learning about the Mormons just recently, and it's just like, oh my God, you guys are something else. I mean, some of the stuff that those people have gotten up to in this country is just absolutely
We're going to have we're going to have a video about that. Right, we're going to leave that, and our next video is going to be on that.
Yeah.
And we're going to come in and we're going to talk about it.
Yeah, so I can't believe, like nobody goes anywhere near it. Like nobody can touch it. It's like they're untouchable.
All right, you know? I'm going to turn this off first now.
All right.
Right. All right, so that's it.